Starfield has not even come out yet, and it seems as if Todd Howard and Pete Hines have already been caught in lies. One of the initial claims when it comes to Starfield as released that it would be a fully open, like open universe game where you could just seamlessly go from planet to planet, explore the entire surface, whether there were civilizations there or not, and find like endless hours of content and things to uncover and aliens to fight and things like that. And people like me immediately knew there was something up, right? This is Bethesda we're talking about. They have a long track record of not getting anything right. Like, I have no idea why anybody would take Bethesda seriously after putting out Fallout 76 and Fallout 4, two of the worst games they've ever put out. But there was a serious like campaign among YouTubers, among Twitter, among shills, among industry shills to try and pretend as if this game was like something remarkable, that it was going to be like a Game of the Year contender, that it was like, oh man, God Howard is delivering Skyrim 2, Starfield, like this is going to be an innovation, this is going to be the next big thing. But reality has set in. Like the red flags are starting to be woven back and forth, waved back and forth, excuse me. Woven, where did I get that from? Waved back and forth, exposing everyone to what this game actually is, which is just like a hackneyed excuse to try and keep Bethesda relevant, to try and like pretend as if Bethesda still hasn't what it takes to be a top tier video game dev in like 2023. Now, we might see the game do really relatively well because it is a new IP. It has a lot of marketing buzz behind it, and like people just kind of eat up anything that comes out these days. But like when it comes to like actual gameplay value, when it comes to like actual quality, which is the thing that gamers should primarily be concerned about, the game is shaping up to be a complete disaster, and nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to admit that this game isn't going to be seamless, that there are like loading screens everywhere, that like the game is simply like not all that well put together. Like when you compare something like this to something like Tears of the Kingdom, like it's night and day because Tears of the Kingdom does things that like you would never expect a game like it to do. With its exploration mechanics, with its like vehicle building, with like the multiple layers to the open world, all of which are like super fleshed out and interesting and unique from each other, like way more complex than anything you've seen in any Fallout game, including New Vegas. Like it's remarkable seeing it is remarkable seeing like the industry like try and turn a blind eye to this while like at the same time simultaneously condemning Zelda, which is the big reason why I'm so upset about this, by the way. The reason why I'm so upset about Armored Core, the same reason I'm upset about Baldur's Gate 3 is because like, you get a game, a mediocre release from a subpar developer that nobody cares about. Like they have some kind of gimmick to it, like Baldur's Gate 3 has like front-loaded content in Act 1. Starfield has like the open universe thing. Diablo 4 is Diablo 4. Like you have like something that gives game journalists like a reason to gush about it, right? Like these people don't play the games, they don't know anything about them, and so like they give these games like super high scores and like heavily promote them. And the general public doesn't really catch on to the fact they've been bamboozled ever. Like we're seeing now with Baldur's Gate 3, where this game has a ton of problems when it comes to like save scumming and the glitches and like the story falling apart after Act One and just a general declining quality. Like it's becoming more and more apparent that the vast majority of the industry, like people who like promote games, who talk about them, who try to show for them, like do not actively play games at all, right? These are people who just like desperately try to pretend as if like these are top tier games. Like Angry Joe is a really good example of this. Over the past year, this guy has given out more 10 out of 10s than he ever has before. I'm not sure why he's doing this. Like Hogwarts Legacy, Baldur's Gate 3 both got 10 out of 10s. I think there were a handful of others. I'll have to go back and check. There were several of them, but like it's the same thing that happened with the PS3 era, right? Where Nintendo is dominating so thoroughly in all sorts of different genres and so all different aspects that like the industry at large has to do damage control. And the primary way to do that is to pretend that games on other platforms are better. And the way to do that is by giving them higher scores. This is why you don't typically see 10 out of 10s being given to like Nintendo games. Like typically the seamless, like perfect 10 out of 10s from every outlet, they're given to stuff like Metal Gear Solid 4. They're given to stuff like Metal Gear Solid 5. They're given to stuff like Baldur's Gate 3, to The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. Like games that the industry wants to push in order to like pretend as if like the real game experience, like the best games in the industry are on other platforms. Because when you take away the sales numbers, when you take away the scores, suddenly these games aren't competitive. When you actually have to compare gameplay, when you actually have to compare content, when you actually have to compare like the experience of playing these games, Nintendo wins every time, right? And that's why that like actual gaming fans, real gamers, Nintendo fans are so sure of themselves when they talk about this, when they're so confident in saying that, like, yeah, Nintendo is the best in the industry. Like, Zelda is the best game of the year. It's not because we're blind fanboys or that we don't know what else is out there. We know what else is out there, but it's just not worth playing, right? Like, well, I'm at that point now where, like, I don't even bother, like, watching Starfield trailers or, like, getting excited for something like Hi-Fi Rush or for Spoken or Final Fantasy 16 because I know these developers so well. I knew exactly what was going to happen before even it came out, right? Final Fantasy 16, I predicted everything wrong with that game, right? Like the only thing that really blindsided me about it was like how badly it actually did. For Square Enix's case, like Final Fantasy 16 was like the final straw for a lot of people, and like they just had no enthusiasm for it whatsoever. The Final Fantasy brand is dead, and Bethesda is not quite at that point yet. But you have to keep in mind that like Skyrim is relatively newer than Final Fantasy X was. So Skyrim, like Bethesda is like going along the same trajectory that Square Enix did, like doing the same kind of things with like the quality control and just the decline and just trying to compete with Nintendo when they absolutely cannot do it. Like it is all going to fall apart eventually. Right, and it's only a matter of time until like we see that happen in real time. Like when we start like noticing it, and I would argue it's already been like very evident since like Fallout 76. Like, how can something like Fallout 76 be made and people aren't actively criticizing Bethesda? Like it's remarkable how you compare like this to like how Nintendo is criticized, where you can go online or whatever and still see people like act as if like Xenoblade Chronicles was like censored or something. Like they have no evidence, they have no like reason to do this, but I've seen people say that like, oh man, I want to play Xenoblade Chronicles, but I heard it was censored. And the reality is that that's not actually true. That is like an example of something that is completely made up to try and put people off from playing Nintendo games, right? And there are countless other examples like that. And like Angry Joe is constantly going off about like copyright strikes and Nintendo taking down his content when in reality he's never made Nintendo content. I, being a YouTube partner, make Nintendo content all the time and never get copyright struck for them. Like never. It just never happens, right? um like the narratives and lies about Nintendo that have like persisted since like the 90s, ever since Genesis launched their like Nintendo campaign, like they are on the verge of death, right? Like the reality is that like other than like a few hardcore like fanatics online who like just obsessively hate Nintendo and everything they do, like people like Video Game Lover 58 who like, who like get excited at the thought of like the Barbie movie outperforming the Mario one. Like people like that who just like obsess over the idea of Nintendo failing and just desperately want it to happen and like always just come up with some excuse to hate Nintendo. It's all falling apart. And what that's going to lead to is that it's going to be harder and harder for companies like Bethesda to compete with Nintendo. Like right now, the only reason that people are excited for Skyrim is because they haven't played it yet. Like much like Armored Core 6, like once this game actually comes out and the illusion is dispelled, actually just like No Man's Sky. Actually just like No Man's Sky. Once this game actually comes out and the illusion is dispelled and people start acknowledging that this game isn't actually all that good, we are going to start seeing like people realize that like, wow, Nintendo is better. And when that happens, when people start going through their like backlog of games, everything available on NSO, like they'll start to realize that Nintendo was always better, right? And it's going to be a slow, gradual process. Like I'm fairly certain that like the people who grew up on like Sega and PlayStation are like never going to grow out of this, but that isn't the case for like younger people at all. Like the Mario movie did extraordinarily well, and I expect that success is going to carry over to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and by extension, like Nintendo Switch, right? Like this is the beginning of Nintendo has been like in a new golden age period since 2017, and we're still in that denial phase. Like people don't want to admit that Nintendo has been winning for the past 30 years, and they will do anything they possibly can to deny that it's real.